probably would have gone to law school, but I had been so indoctrinated from an early age that I should go to law school, that it was only as a senior in college that I started to think about what somebody who was deeply interested in politics did for a living. And with law school, all that sort of crossed off by family leanings in opposite directions. I wound up going to graduate school after some time, as I mentioned, in New York City government, New York City politics. And I came to politics because I think that politics, though not unique in this, has a capacity at its best to bring us together and to accomplish impressive things. If you think about the reasons that you are proud to be an American or proud of whatever nationality you claim, often those are things that were accomplished together. Right? Those are many of the things that Americans are proudest of, whether it's putting a person on the moon or the American role in World War II, how Americans came together during the Great Depression. Within my lifetime, when I was working in New York City over September 11th, that was clearly a defining moment. But I think politics at its best has the capacity to bring people together to accomplish things that can't be accomplished otherwise. Right? If you think about many of the challenges that we face today, they're challenges that to some extent require government. Government has to play a role, say, if we want to be addressing climate change or any one of a number of other deep challenges we face. So I'm committed then to politics, but I'm also deeply troubled by the kinds of things that I see in politics today. And I want to talk to you a bit about what I've been learning about American politics, and I think what it suggests about the ways that you and I, as citizens, as activists, as people who care, can continue to make a difference here. So again, thanks for the invitation. It's actually really fitting that we're here in Philadelphia, because here in Philadelphia, is no surprise to anybody in this room, a lot of the foundational thinking about what America would look like was done. Right? It was in this city in 1776 that people from a range of the 13 states came together to try to design a document and design a framework that we could then use to sustain ourselves politically. And in some ways, many of both the wise decisions and the challenges, the poor decisions that they made, are still with us today. But it's worth, for a moment, going back to 1776, and particularly to 1787, when the Constitutional Convention happened here in Philadelphia, because it was a very, very, very different time. In 1787, it took the Georgia delegation 6 weeks to travel through mud-choked roads to get here to Philadelphia. The Constitutional Convention actually had to be delayed while the various delegations came from the different parts of our nascent union. And at the time, the states were really very, very different. They were different in heritage, they were different in economy, such that it was not at all clear that the United States would in fact be a single country. Some historians have argued that it's really appropriate to think about our Constitution as a kind of peace pact. That is to say that our states were sufficiently different, and keep in mind, this is 1787, right? Germany is not a single country. It's a collection of different principalities in some sense. Italy the same, right? And so the idea that we would be a single country wasn't in any sense preordained. And in fact, even when the Constitution was written, our Constitution gave substantial authority to the states. And that makes sense because at the time, states were much more proximate objects, right? Harrisburg was much more likely to, or the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, was much more likely to be where the action was. That's where many of the important policy decisions that would actually affect people's lives would be. Once D.C. became our capital, D.C. was tasked with handling things that were remote from the everyday American's experience, things like the post office and foreign affairs, at a time when foreign affairs was far more distant. So, our nation's capital and our federal government handled remote issues, and a lot of the day-to-day issues were left to the states and localities. And so it was no surprise then that our founders thought that our states and localities would be, that was really where democracy, at least as they construed it, would be most vibrant. People would care most about what was happening at the state and local level. But if you fast forward to today, I wouldn't be surprised if many of you in the room are eagerly following the elections that are coming up in a week and 2 days. And I also wouldn't be surprised if you were following elections outside the state with as much or more interest than you're following elections within the state, right? I think many of the people that I encounter are more likely to ask me about the Nevada Senate race than about the Pennsylvania Senate race. If you think about the 2014 elections, that was an election in which a whole set of largely Democratic incumbent senators ran for office, arguing that they were the best fit, that they had protected their particular state, whether it was Begich in Alaska, or Kay Hagan in North Carolina, Mary Landrieu in Louisiana, or Pryor in Arkansas, and they all lost. And they all lost because of the D next to their name and the fact that it was more important to the voters of those states that they have somebody who represented their partisan and ideological convictions than that they had somebody who had a track record of bringing home the bacon, of defending and serving that particular state. We're in a very different world now than the framers were when they wrote the Constitution. We're in a world when people care much more about what's happening in D.C. than what's happening often in their states and localities. Just a couple quick examples of this. One of the things that I've done is I've spent a lot of time looking at Google searches, right? What do people search for? And it turns out that even if you restrict, you look only at Google searches done in a given state, those Google searches are almost always more likely to be targeting the president than they are the governor of that state. So take just across the Delaware River, New Jersey. In late 2009, Chris Christie was running for governor against the incumbent John Corzine. Narrowly won. And in that week, Chris Christie only got very slightly more, about 10 searches in the state of New Jersey for every 6 that Barack Obama got. And Barack Obama wasn't on the ballot. And this is a phenomenon that I see again and again. If you think here in Philadelphia, our mayor's races used to have turnout that was 80 or 90% of the turnout in a presidential year. Nowadays, turnout here in Philadelphia in a mayor's race, maybe is going to crack a quarter of what turnout is in the presidential race. People just care markedly less about governors, about mayors, about state and local politics. That's the same is true for vote choice. I think that a really useful way to think about our political parties nowadays is that they're much like McDonald's and Burger King, offering the same products in all parts of the country, right? So just as you can choose between a Whopper and whatever else Burger King sells in any part of this country, saying you can choose between a Big Mac and chicken McNuggets, and I'm making my conversation clear, I guess. Anywhere in the country, so too, the Democrats and Republicans are increasingly similar brands anywhere in the country. So that the kinds of campaigns that are being run for and against candidates are homogeneous, right? The Democrats are saying one thing, the Republicans are saying another. And Democrats are being attacked as backing Nancy Pelosi, Republicans are being attacked as being stand-ins for President Trump. So it's important because this is the title of this talk comes from the title of a book that I published this year, and I get pushback on this title, and understandably so. So it's worth clarifying what I'm not arguing, what I don't find in the book, right? I had thought about the title "All Politics is National," a kind of pithy flip on Tip O'Neill's famous aphorism, but I don't think that's the right title because I don't think that all politics is national, and indeed part of the concern that animates my book is precisely that states and localities still address really important issues, right? Think about the challenges we face here in Philadelphia. Whether they're challenges of making sure that all children have quality education, or even that all children have school buildings that are safe and that can keep them warm enough in the winter and cool enough in the summer. Those are different issues. But the question of charter schools, the question of gun violence, the question of keeping our streets clean and safe, those are different issues than the issues that should animate the politics of Idaho or Arizona, or even maybe more rural parts of our state. So I'm not arguing that all politics is national. I'm instead arguing that there's a real disconnect that is really troublesome between our increased emphasis on attention to national politics, which kind of like the sun seems to sort of blind us to everything else that's going on in the solar system, right? And the very real, very, very consequential decisions that are made at the state and local level. I do a lot of survey work, I do a lot of interviews, I do a lot of talking to voters. And one thing that I'll say is that I leave a lot of those interviews much more optimistic about the state of American politics because fundamentally, whether I'm talking to Republicans or Democrats, there are a lot of good people in the country, and there are a lot of people who care deeply about its fate. But I think that the challenge is for those of us who study politics, but even much more for those of us who are citizens and engaged with and care about the state of American democracy, that good people can wind up in difficult situations through no fault of their own. right? Just as when you think about a traffic jam, you don't immediately think, oh, I know, it's the Democrats who are blaming for the traffic jam, or the Republicans who are blaming for the traffic jam, right? A traffic jam is a classic coordination problem. It's a classic problem in which good people find themselves in a suboptimal, bad situation because they're all trying to get somewhere else, right? And I think increasingly, contemporary politics has this flavor, right? That there are lots and lots of people who care deeply, and ironically, the passion, their very passion for politics is meaning that is in some sense causing us to be obsessively focused on national politics and to miss the state and local politics where we can make a difference. So why is this happening? Well, I've recently turned 40, and as a 40-year-old, I may be the youngest subscriber to the Philadelphia Inquirer. Right? I actually get the paper version, and I have never seen anyone who even plausibly could be younger than me reading the Philadelphia Inquirer in hard copy. And I think that this points to a much broader transformation that is critical in understanding American democracy. And that's that our media are increasingly nationalized. For decades earlier, say the 50s, 60s, 70s, there was kind of a happy accident, which was that a lot of our sources of information happened to be based in particular places and committed to particular places. If you published the Philadelphia Inquirer, if you owned a TV station in Philadelphia, you had a strong incentive to provide information that was relevant to people living in a particular place. And if you wanted to know the Eagles score, which I'd like to know the Eagles score, but if you wanted to know the Eagles score, if you wanted to know the weather, you would look to that one, you'd look to a newspaper, you'd look to local television. But nowadays, we have both the proliferation of choices as to where we get our information, and critically, our information sources aren't spatially bound anymore. It's not that I need to read the Philadelphia Inquirer. If I want to learn about the Eagles, I can go right to a blog that covers the Eagles, or I can go to ESPN. And if I want to learn about politics, I can go to Politico or some national website, right? Fox News' business strategy has nothing to do with providing information about Philadelphia. And indeed, Fox News' business strategy and the New York Times' business strategy is to cover a broad swath of space. And so, more and more, whether we learn about politics through Fox News, whether we read the New York Times, we're getting our political information from national media outlets that have incentives to focus our attention nationally. And then, if you're a state and local politician, you read the tea leaves, right? You see that this is happening. You realize that fewer reporters are calling you from the Baltimore Sun, if you're in Baltimore or Annapolis, from the Philadelphia Inquirer. And at the same time, you recognize that the pathway to success is often through national donor networks, right? There may be many people in this room who give money politically, and oftentimes people who give money politically want to be efficacious, they want to be impactful. They're going to give money to cases where there are close races, right? As late as 1990, 2/3 of all of the campaign funding it was made up of individual contributions to members of Congress, came from within the state that they represented. Now the ratio is reversed. So that 2/3, and my guess is that even more so as we have nationalized election after nationalized election. Politicians understand this, right? They know that they're in very close touch with the national donor community. And you'll see that politicians, as they're trying to build their profile, they're traveling to the so-called ATM districts, right? Places where they can raise money. If you're a Republican, maybe you go to Dallas. If you're a Democrat, you go to Southern California, maybe New York. So we have a changing information environment where we can't learn as much about state and local politics. And this is ironic, because 10 years ago, as the internet was kind of coming into full force, there was this prospect, we held out hope, that maybe the internet was going to lead to a revolution of engagement in state and local politics, right? Now all of a sudden, I can find out what's happening in West Philadelphia, North Philadelphia, wherever, at incredibly low cost. And so you could imagine as a side gig, running a blog about a very local community. And indeed, that has happened. But one of the core findings of social science about the internet is that people want to get information that their friends are likely to get. People are attracted to sources of information that are prominent, that other people are talking to. And so these powerful network effects, they're powerful effects in which If I know that you're on the Fox News website, if I know that you're on NewYorkTimes.com, if I know that you're on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, that's where I'll go, right? And so it turns out that even though in theory, reducing the cost of producing information should have led to a proliferation, potentially, of all this engagement with very, very hyper-local politics, it's done the reverse. Instead, we're all obsessively following, and I'm part of the problem, right? I write for 538. People are obsessively following distant events and not very engaged with what's happening in their own home communities. And partly this is a problem because when we think about national politics, we're thinking about it in different terms, right? If national politicians and the media want to keep an audience, they need to generate spectacle. They need to generate controversy, right? And our president, whatever you wish to say about him, is a source of endless spectacle and controversy, right? And he knows that he can then kind of crowd out an information environment, and this week he was bemoaning the fact that events were preventing him from setting the agenda in the way that he would like to. This is one of the central challenges, that we have highly nationalized media, and partly the problem is us in the sense that this is speaking to our anxieties, our concerns. Right? We are committed Americans, and many of us, and those identities are really important. And so we are bothered. We can be rendered sleepless by the thought that our country is moving in directions that we don't like. And I talk to people extensively about how they care about their states and localities. And it's worth pointing out that many people are still very grounded in states and localities. I am not as grounded in a state locality. Academics are some of the rare people who still tend to move around a lot, right? So, as I mentioned, I taught at Georgetown, and I wrote a fair amount of this book in Baltimore. And I was really wrestling in Baltimore with the fact that I was in Baltimore in 2012, 2013. The Ravens were making an improbable Super Bowl run, and every house seemed to have Ravens flags. My kids going to schools would wear purple on Fridays. There was a real sense that Baltimore was inextricably connected with the Ravens. But at the same time, as I have quizzed people about their commitments to their localities, though people are deeply committed to the places that they are, those identities are not in any sense political nowadays, right? So if you tell me that you're a committed Baltimorean, committed to Philadelphia, that doesn't tell me anything about how likely you are to be engaged in, care about local, let alone national politics. So even though we are very local in some sense as a nation, right? The average American lives 18 minutes from his or her mother. We are nonetheless, when we step into the political realm, it's like we're shedding a lot of those local allegiances, or they're just not relevant. We're stepping into a realm that's sort of a homogenized realm of national partisan combat. And I think that this is worrisome. I think this is worrisome for a whole bunch of reasons. I think this is partly worrisome because, as I started to mention, if you think about how you could, as a citizen, actually affect political outcomes, you don't think about turning on the television, right? You think about knocking on people's doors. You think about attending meetings here at City Hall, right? You think about registering people to vote. Local activities grounded in your community. You think about organizing your friends, right? I will bet that many people are here in this audience today because of the social element, because you expected to see people that you like, people that you care about, that you want to come together, and that is an animating idea in a lot of worship and a lot of different religiously inspired traditions. Right? But the challenge is that when we step into the national political realm, we immediately feel less efficacious. We feel like we're spectators. We feel like we're watching rather than like we're able to engage. And that's a deep challenge. So not only that, but as we move to a more nationalized politics, one of the things that we lose is accountability. So we have more and more nationalized politicians who are interested in implementing some national party line in their particular state. So I could pull examples from either political party, but I want to focus on Sam Brownback. Sam Brownback was, until recently, the governor of Kansas. He'd previously been a senator. When he was elected governor of Kansas, he then embarked on a pretty pronounced departure from Kansas policy with dramatic state tax cuts. And he was encouraged in this by national networks who wanted to see Kansas as a kind of petri dish for 21st century supply-side economics. It turns out that the tax cuts were so steep that they jeopardized a lot of education funding. They led to rating cuts in Kansas's bond rating. And they led to then a surprisingly close gubernatorial election in Kansas in 2014. There were a lot of Republicans who crossed party lines who opposed Sam Brown back because they were worried about the extent of these cuts. But even then, 2014 was nationally a Republican year. Sam Brown back narrowly won. And I think that that's an example of one of the deep challenges in our nationalized politics, which is that partisans have increased incentives to play to national networks. And it's very, very hard in a lot of instances for voters to turn out an incumbent in a state where that incumbent is favored, right? In a state where that incumbent's party is dominant. So that's not the only problem. I think that nationalization also has a profound impact on our ability to make bargains. It used to be that on any given piece of legislation, there was some number of senators and members of Congress, representatives, who cared deeply. But there were very few members of Congress who cared so deeply that they couldn't, in a sense, be bought off. And I mean that in a positive sense. So a member of Congress always had some pet project in their district that they would want to see accomplished. And if you could then bundle that pet project with a bill, you could get a lot of legislation passed. And so even though the 1980s was a period of divided government, the Democrats held the House, the Republicans held the Senate for 6 years, the Republicans held the presidency throughout the 80s. There were fairly sizable pieces of legislation that emerged in the 1980s, right? Things like a major tax reform, a major immigration reform. And that happened precisely because most people didn't care deeply about taxes, but they did care about how those issues affected their jurisdictions. Nowadays, though, we don't have earmarks in the House of Representatives anymore. And more generally, members of Congress care much less about the specific question of what's in it for my state and much more about general questions about how does my party feel. And that means that every single bill that comes up in the House and Senate winds up being a test of party strength. Right? There are very few people willing to defect, willing to back a bill that would seem to advantage the other party. We have no grounds to negotiate now because everything is nationalized, everything is partisan, and everything is essentially the same question. It's, are you a Democrat or are you a Republican? So the absence of local and then a commitment to things that are local and state-oriented means that we have less grounds for bargaining, right? You can't sweeten the pot and produce some sort of supermajority for a compromised piece of legislation by throwing something into Pennsylvania. But I think potentially most worrisome, and this is the note on which I'll conclude, is the fact that nationalized politics also shifts our agenda in really critical ways. So if you think back, what are the kinds of issues that have animated us in the last years, even in the last decade? So many of them are deeply symbolic issues that in some other instances are also empty issues, right? So we spent weeks discussing how NFL players should react to the national anthem. And there was no policy question on the table. There was no legislation being discussed. There was no executive order that had anything to do with that, right? Pure symbolism. It was purely about which groups we want to see affirmed and which groups we want to enter. And that's the danger, part of the danger of a nationalized politics, that to hold the attention of 320 million diverse citizens, we wind up with a politics that's very identity-infused, it's very zero-sum. So I worry that as we shift to a nationally oriented politics, we're also shifting to a symbolic politics, a zero-sum politics, an identity-fraud politics, and one that is, in some sense, very difficult to envision and escape from. So, on that note, I want to thank you guys for the opportunity to come chat with you.